Hello everyone, and welcome to the last weekly wrap-up of 2020. Yes, the coming week is going to be filled with a lot of crazy awesomeness, and so this is going to be the last weekly wrap-up I do. In place of a weekly wrap-up next week, you're going to see my yearly stats and, talking about all the crazy amounts of books that I read this year, which is just bonkers. Also, what you're going to see this week is full Bridgerton week. All right, I mentioned this a little bit on my Instagram for what you say, but I'm getting everything set up. I'm about to start filming my episode by episode breakdown of the Bridgerton series on Netflix. I understand that, out of all of you who are my subscribers, some of you might not be here for the Bridgerton content. Maybe you're not that interested. That's totally fine. There will still be other videos going up during the week. Those videos will be scheduled for like their regular time, which is 7 a.m. Central. If you didn't know, that's when I post. And then the Bridgerton episodes breakdowns are going to be dropping. I'm not 100% sure, but I think they're going to be dropping at noon Central Time. There's going to be one every day and two on the last day until they are all out, which is just so exciting. I am a little overwhelmed with the filming of it, but I'm very excited. So I'm getting kind of a comfortable set up. I have more Julia Quinns to fill in here, so it is very filled with them. But I hope you had a wonderful Christmas. I hope you got to do some reading. I hope you, maybe watched Bridgerton if you could. If not, know that my reviews are coming, so maybe get on that when you can. But beside that, I also read 12 books this week, which is great. Before we dive into that though, we do have 4 new channel members to shout out. I've kind of been, I had a lot of pre-film videos, so just so you know, as a subscriber, every level of mine that you sign up for comes with a shout out on the channel and then your name at the end of the credits. That's the base level of membership. And then every other level after that, that's also included, right? And so I had filmed one video where I shouted out a couple of these names and then I ended up scrapping it, which I never scrap a video like ever because I don't mind how I look or how I sound. If I mess up, I usually just let it go because you guys don't mind if I just let things flow or whatever. But I was just not in the right headspace that day, which I don't know what was going on, but when I went to edit this video, which is the one that had the shout outs in it, it was just, I was too spacey and like didn't have coherent thoughts. So I was like, you know what, let's just scrap this. So now we have 4 shout outs to do. So I'll do those real quickly here. We have Victoria from Victoria's Bookish Loves and Jeannie Wilson, both joined at the sassy supporter level. So thank you ladies so much. And then we had Ashley from A Loves Books and Tiffany from Neverland Pixie who joined at the Faded Friend level. Thank you all so much. It means so much to me that you would join the channel, that you find my content worth supporting. That really means a lot to me that you would take this journey with me and trust me that I will continue to have great content. So look forward to it at the end of this video and all future videos to see your name in the credits. So after that, let us dive into these books because I have a lot to say about some of these. And a little bit of the side story is like, yeah, I'm ready to dive into film my reviews, but I was like, I need to film my weekly wrap up first because once I get into the Bridgerton reviews, I won't be able to pull myself away. But I did read a lot this week and there was some fantastic books. So the first one that I read is continuing with the Duke's Daughter series, and I read The Lady is Daring by Megan Frampton. This series has really been an absolute delight. I've slowly been collecting Megan Frampton because her books, well, they're so beautiful, and also she just writes these really sweet, fun, a little bit quirky, pretty sexy books. And so this is book 3. And this one is about Ida Howlett, who she is kind of a scholar. She is, I think, she's one of the twins because there's a set of twins in this family. And so her two of her older sisters have made really good matches so far and things have been going great. But there is a sister named Della who for the past few years has been kind of living in self-imposed exile because she ran away with her dance teacher. And then when she found out she was pregnant, he actually abandoned her because he's a jackass. It's a thing. And Ida has it in her head that she's tired of being separated from her sister and her niece, and so she is going to go about bringing her daughter back, because her other sisters have agreed that they will help support her and her niece, and she just doesn't care what she has to do. She's going to get her. So she actually runs away. But when she runs away to go find her sister, she accidentally hops into a cab that Bennett, Lord Carson, is sleeping in. So in this series, Lord Carson has actually been connected with both of her sisters previously. Like, her oldest sister was engaged to him for a time. That's the first book in the series. And then her second sister actually decided that she was in love with Bennett and was really pursuing him. And then he didn't feel the same, so he kind of like pushed her towards a friend of his. And now this one, he wakes up in this carriage with her, and now they realize that, like, oh no, I'm gonna be ruined if you come back without me. And so, or if anyone finds out, but he can't leave her because he's like, I can't leave you on your own to try to find your sister. So he agrees to come along with, and they'll just try to mitigate the damage however they can. And so this ends up being a road trip novel. There's close proximity that goes with it. And it's really great because Bennett obviously is really hesitant to fall for a Howlett sister, because 2 out of the 5 have already like made a go at him. But he is just completely enthralled with Ida. And of course, when some fun things start to happen, there is a rainstorm scene. It's really funny. Ava Lee said this when we had a talk with her. She's like, when there's rain, of course, it's the worst rain there's ever been, and we get completely soaked, all the layers of clothing that we wear. And that's exactly what happens in this one at a time. But they're just so sweet. I've been listening to these ones on audio. Jilly Bond is the narrator, and they're so fun. She does a really great growly gentleman voice, and I just loved it. So I actually gave this one a 4.5 stars. It was fantastic. Then I read Don't Hex and Drive by Juliette Cross. I was almost finished with this at the end of the last week, but then I got like distracted by other things. This is the second book in the Stay a Spell series. Crystal, as well as, I follow Juliette and the podcast she does with Jessen. And so after I finally got myself to read Wolf Gone Wild, I wasn't even 50 pages into Wolf Gone Wild, and I was like, one-click purchase this one because I know I'm going to read it. Just so you know, if you do have KU, these books are both currently on Kindle Unlimited. I purchased them because I wanted copies of them. But this one is about Isadora Savoy, who is one of the Savoy sisters, which is what the series is going to be about. And then we have Devraj Kumar, who is a vampire, and he's a vampire who's actually a Bollywood movie star, and he gets called to town to assist with a series of, I think it's disappearances. I'm not sure if it's murders or just disappearances. Yes, that's something that's happening. And so the Savoy sisters get involved in this as well because they want to stop it happening. And again, in this paranormal world that's set up, each witch will have like a different affinity for something, as well as, each vampire might have something they're stronger or better at or not. And so all those powers come together, and they're trying to figure out who is doing this evil thing. And Isadora, she's kind of prickly. She's not the best with people. And Devraj, though, is just so charming. And he doesn't make her a conquest so much as he just really wants her attention because he thinks that she's so amazing and beautiful. And so, and just spunky and smart and a little bit quirky. And so he really kind of makes it his mission to get her attention, and it's really beautiful and just, it's so sweet. And this one was, in my opinion, like a lot sexier than Wolf Gone Wild. Wolf Gone Wild is very like animalistic, just obviously because of that, but Devraj knows how to turn up the heat, and it was absolutely delicious. And funny thing is, I actually have watched quite a few Bollywood movies when I was young, because my aunt was friends with a lot of native Indians who worked with her. That sounded weird, I said, not Native Americans, but Native Indians who were over here working. And so we would watch some of their favorite movies with them. And so I can definitely see how, like, there are some sexy sexy men from that. So anyway, Juliette actually has a note in the back about who her favorite is and who's kind of the inspiration for Devraj. So that's great. But this was great. I gave this one 4.5 stars as well. I think the thing for me that's always just a little bit of it, and it's why I've given Wolf Gone Wild and this 4.5 stars, is that for me there's still just this little bit of like disconnect between how serious the paranormal situations are for how like quirky and fun the book is. And so that makes it easier to digest. And I did say, you know, when talking about Wolf Gone Wild, that I think this series would be a great intro to paranormal for you if you have never read one before and don't know if you'd like it. It really reads like a romantic comedy, plus it has the paranormal elements. It's just there's a little bit of a disconnect for me because we go from these really funny, you know, sexy scenes, and then the things, specifically in this one, the crime that's happening, the evil that's happening is very serious. And so to me, there was just that little bit where I'm like, it feels like it wasn't quite as smooth with that as I would like. But this was such a joy to read, and I cannot wait for more. The two future couples that are maybe set up make me very excited, and you know, I'm going to be pre-ordering these as soon as possible. And I'm so happy I love them because I think Juliette is such a wonderful woman, and just the little bit of interaction that I've had with her, I am so happy I love her book. And I have already ordered a couple of her older ones, which I know are more darker paranormal, which I feel like I would like a lot. So then I was lucky enough to get the ARC copy of My Dad's Best Friend by Katee Robert. This is her Dad's Best Friend in her Touch of Taboo series. This one was probably the sexiest of the three so far. It has tinges of like Your Dad Will Do, but this one just worked for me even better because, anyway, I'll explain what little should be explained because this is only 140 pages. You know, you don't need to know too much about it before going in. Like, if you like Katee Robert, you'll like this. But she's 28 and he is 40, I think. And 5-6 years ago, she made a pass at her dad's best friend and it didn't go so well. He, you know, was like, I can't because you're my best friend's daughter and you're, you know, then she was like 22 and it just wasn't going to be a thing. And now she's trying to make a move for herself within her dad's company, which is an architect firm. And he's one of the best like designers that there is. And so she brings herself to his home to make a plea to him there, and then ends up getting stuck because of a storm. And then they end up, you know, fucking all their differences out, and there's a little bit of daddy kink involved. And honestly, I would also say this was a good intro to daddy kink if you have heard me talk about it or the other channels talk about it and are kind of like, ooh, that's crazy. This was a really good intro because there's no like stepfather dynamic or friend's dad's dynamic. Like, they're both like well older, you know, because she's 28 and he's 40, so there's that age gap part of it, but also she is well of an age, right? Like it's there's no like creepy line there at all. And the way that it's incorporated, I feel like, is pretty subtle, right? So I actually think this one could be a good intro to see if you like it, because it wasn't as heavy-handed as some other daddy kink I've read where it's just like, okay, we're going a little too far with this. Nothing is too far for me, but you know. All right, so that was 5-star for me, and I think it's my favorite of her 3 Touch of Taboo, to be honest. So, all right, then I read Fractals by Alicia Anthony, and this was a NetGalley e-arc. And as you'll see, I want to point you to my my Goodreads review for this if you want to know more. I was a little bit blindsided by this book because it was in the new adult section on NetGalley, which doesn't get not a ton of books get categorized into new adult on there, and they're all sexy books, the ones that are, right? They're usually college age or stuff like that. And so I thought this was going to be a student-teacher age gap romance. And I didn't read it correctly, and it actually was like a thriller slash like mystery that was going on. And so it was about this girl that in the beginning of the book, she gets rescued by this guy who's a young teacher. He's like 24, 25, and he rescues her from a tough situation, helps her get into a school that he teaches at, helps get her on track, and actually his girlfriend at the time becomes her caseworker because she is works for family services. At the beginning of this book, her father is murdered, and she is kind of left in like not great hands. And so the social worker, who now this has been like a year later, she now is no longer engaged to our hero anymore. And this caseworker asks that he be able to house her for a while. So I was like, oh, this is the setup for student teacher thing. And it wasn't. So this book was not meant for me. There's no like HEA to this. I mean, there is an ending, and it is a bittersweet ending, right? But it is about finding out like what happened to her dad and what has happened to, she has a missing sister, and there are trigger warnings for like forced prostitution, rape, assault, self-harm. There is a lot of trigger warnings for this, and it didn't have a romance to tide me over. And because I didn't know that, I got about halfway in, and there's a tipping point between these two, because there is like, the child does have feelings for her teacher in this, but the book plays it more as like, I feel like more of a realistic situation, because he's like, no, I'm here to help you and take care of you. I'm not here for there to be anything. Whereas if this had been a romance, that would have been the turning point into it. So this is me saying that like this was not an enjoyable read for me. I feel like it was teasing things that were never going to happen. Also, there's trigger warnings for miscarriage in here that I wasn't expecting. And so I ended up giving this 3 stars, but I am fully aware that this book was not for me. And I wish I had checked before I had asked for it. But I assumed that it was a romance because it was a new adult. And that was my fault. This was a new adult thriller, not a new adult romance. So this book was not for me. If you like thrillers and you don't mind if there's not a romance in it, this was actually pretty good. But I have to rate it for like how I would recommend it. And though it was like a good read, I was hate reading it at one point. And whenever that happens, you start losing stars because it wasn't giving me like what I wanted out of it. So it was frustrating. Then I read Blame It on the Champaign by Fiona Cole. This was her new release of her new series. I think it's going to be a trilogy, or maybe it's 4. There was 3 or 4 friends, but they're all going to be like have an alcohol title of some kind. And this one is about a girl who's about to be forced into an arranged marriage by her dad. It is a modern day one, but it's a business deal, kind of mob-like. It was a little bit mob-like, but more just like high-end business. And he has let her go to college, let her do all these things, but now it's time for her to get married to this like really old dude who is very controlling. We see glimmers of him being very possessive and controlling of her and wanting to own her. And she applies for a job behind her dad's back and actually gets a job. And it ends up being with a rival to her dad, because she uses her grandmother's maiden name instead of her family name, and she gets a job working for this guy. And then they end up having a marriage of convenience so that she will be safe from this marriage to this other guy. But he is doing it for revenge purposes, because he ends up finding out who she is pretty early on, but doesn't tell her that he knows who she is, and is going to use it as kind of revenge against her dad. And so I gave this 4 stars because I thought it was a really cool setup, but for it being called Blame It on the Champaign, I thought this was going to be like a Vegas wedding situation. And it actually was more that they were drunk when they decided to do the arranged marriage. So that wasn't quite what I want. And maybe she's saving a Vegas marriage for like later in the series. But yeah, and also we had kind of like deceitful sex happening because she doesn't know who this guy is, and he continues to sleep with her before telling her. So I don't know, maybe this isn't even quite a 4-star, but like it was a really quick read and it was fun. And I love Fiona Cole, and I love that she always has some deeper things going on in her story, but it was kind of frustrating at points for me too. So then I read Dora Bruises by Simone. This was another new release. This was the 4th and final book in the Thornchapel saga series, whatever. So I gave this 4.5 stars because Sierra Simone knows how to rip your heart out. And there's a lot about this book that reminded me of the new Camelot in like a lot of ways. And I can't talk too much about this because it's the 4th book in a series. And I know that it was good. Like, I know that it was good. But she also always has these like supernatural fantasy elements in the story, and I just didn't understand them. Because some of them are just kept really vague, and I can't tell if it's magical realism or if it was paranormal. But like the feelings she evokes from you are so strong and real. And so I was emotionally invested, and I read through this book so quick, and I loved it. But when it was over, I was confused, and I'm not a huge fan of that. Okay? Like, I'm just being honest. Like, I'm not a huge fan of like an ambiguous kind of ending. And it wasn't that the happily ever after is very like set. Like, I understand how we got our HEA and everything, but I don't understand a certain magical element that was in this story. And I can't say any more than that. So if you've read these books and you understood what was happening at the end, I would very much appreciate if you reached out to me and would tell me. Because even the reviews, like, you know, no one wants to talk spoilers because it's the last book. But a lot of them are like, oh, so moving. It was so emotional. I loved it. I'm like, but how? Because I also felt like it was really emotional and I loved it. But I have no clue how that ending part happened and what it was. And she does that sometimes. And again, I was still very emotionally invested, and I love these characters. But when it was over, I was left really unsatisfied because I don't know how we got there. Or why a certain thing happened and what its purpose was, but to like hurt people, but to make you cry. So like, I'm getting emotional about it. I always do. So I gave it 4.5 because when I look at that series as a whole, it's amazing to see how far the characters came. And she writes a dom-sub relationship and aftercare and deep feelings just so well. Like, she will just break you down, and I love it. I love it. But I can't deny that I was confused, and I don't think it's because I'm stupid. So there's that. But anyway, I could also read them all again, but they just hurt too much for me to do that. So I'm glad that series is finished, and I really liked it. So then I read his Harlot by S.M. Violette, and I also read his Valet by S.M. Violette. So I was told about S.M. Violette by one of you when I talked about Notorious last week, which was by Minerva Spencer. I'll show the cover of one of these. This isn't Notorious, but this is Minerva Spencer's Historicals. And one of you guys told me that she writes erotic historical romance under the name S.M. Violette. And she actually has a couple series. So this is a trilogy. I haven't read the 3rd one yet, but I have it bought. I just wasn't going to keep reading it on Christmas because they're a little bit spicy, obviously. And so his Harlot is a heavily BDSM story, and it's about a high-class escort who has this one customer who's been coming to see her for a while, and he wants to have a more permanent relationship with her. And she knows, and permanent as in like a mistress situation with her, instead of just coming to see her twice a week for how long he's been coming to see her. And she is already like in love with him. She is a very submissive personality. She is also a painter, an artist. She has been like living at this brothel for many years. She had like run away from home, and not because her parents made her, but because she wanted to be more free with her sexuality without like causing shame to her family. But anyway, this book is not going to be for everyone, and not just because of the smut. This is also has cheating involved, because while he is with his mistress, he knows that he needs a wife because he needs an heir. And so he takes on a 18-year-old bride. So he's 35, his mistress is 26, and he takes on an 18-year-old bride, and they hate each other. And it becomes clear that part of the reason that his bride hates him is that she is a lesbian. And so she finds out about his mistress, who is actually living with them as his like ward, saying that she was like, anyway, he's her guardian, he's saying. And his wife finds out, and instead of being angry, she actually is falling for the mistress as well. So they are having, so it's like this husband and wife are like both cheating on each other with the same person, and it just becomes a very tangled story. And so it does have an HEA. I was really, really moved with how this story wrapped up, but I understand that a lot of you will not be comfortable with this story because it's quite intense. It's a lot. Wow, the sun's deciding to come out and there's nothing I can do about it at this point. And then his valet is about this person named Joe who has lived as a man their whole life. She goes by her and he, so if you read it, you'll understand that like there wasn't really choosing of pronouns yet. But when Joe dresses as Joe, he's he, and when he dresses as Josephine, she's she, okay? So I'm just going to do what the author did when I talk about it so that I am as correct as I can. But Joe's father actually raised her as a man because he needed an heir. Ooh, boy, what's the lighting doing with us? I don't know. And so he ends up falling for his master that he currently has, and then his master finds out and doesn't know how he feels about it, and there's just a lot with this story. It was still pretty good. I gave this one a 4-star as well. This series is very interesting. It's very intriguing, and you should definitely try it out if you like to read books with that with BDSM in historical, or you like I don't know how this categorizes. You really just have to read the descriptions of the book and see if you're into it. The author does have the trigger warnings needed and kind of explains it pretty well in hers. I have to fix it. That's not as fun lighting, but we do what we gotta do. So yeah, I gave them both 4 stars, but they are like impossible to describe to you. So maybe look up what the author has to say, because she does have a pretty good description that I feel like summarizes it better than I can. So sorry, that's not my best work explaining it. But then I have started reading some more Scottish historicals, because I am working on a video for January. And so I have a huge stack of historical Scottish romances, and one of those is Highland Spitfire by Mary Wine. This is one of my friend Tamika's favorite historicals. It was actually the first historical romance she had ever read, which is really fun. So this is about Beach McPherson and Ailish Robertson, and they are in a feud, and I believe it is the King's Regent is sick of them fighting. So the regent kidnaps like both of their fathers and holds like a gun to their head and is like, you guys either get married or we're killing you all and we're ending this. And so they step up and they get married, and they have this crazy sexual tension together. And yeah, it's an enemies to lovers, and it is really beautiful to watch because Beach is baffled by how this is going down, because he does not want to be married to this woman, and she doesn't want to be married to him. She doesn't want to, because she's the one who will have to leave her family to live with Beach and to live in a hostile environment, because none of his clansmen want them to be married to each other either. So even though this is supposed to be ending the feud between their lands, it doesn't mean that she's in a comfortable position when she goes back to his land. But they have amazing chemistry with each other, and they're just so beautiful. I really liked it. And I mean, it takes a long time for them to finally do it because they keep putting it off. And so there's a lot of talk of like, is she your bride or is she your wife? And for them, that's the distinction, is like, have you had sex yet? Because this alliance isn't real yet if you're able to walk away. And if you haven't consummated this marriage, you could still walk away. But I really loved it. I listened to this one on Scribd, which was great. The narrator, his name is Anthony Ferguson, and I ended up, another historical one, he narrated too, and I really like his Scottish voices. So this I gave a 4.5 stars. It did have those kind of classic misunderstandings that enemies to lovers have, and I kind of wanted them to usurp it in a way and be a little bit different. But this was very enjoyable. I have the next 2 in the series coming soon, and I cannot wait to read more of them. It was great. All right, so after Highland Spitfire, I read, let's talk about this one. I read Return of the Rogue then, which this was another one. I finally started a Donna Fletcher because she's on my list of authors that I want to try, and I own like 10, 12 of her books. They're the ones that have like the really beautiful covers. But I started with this one because it is the first in the Sinclair Brothers series, and this one has an amazing beginning. This one also has an arranged marriage. So this one has Honora Tannick, who she is a very beaten down and abused woman. I'll tell you that. Her mother is died and she lives with her stepfather, and her stepfather has made a deal for her to marry one of these Sinclairs, and he's very abusive to her. He's been beating her for years, and honestly she believes her mother died because her mother just kind of gave up. And she is engaged to marry the next laird of the clan. Well, a year ago, both the oldest and the youngest Sinclair brothers were kidnapped by barbarians. So this takes place in the 1500s. And so it's kind of wild and crazy in Scotland. And on the day of her wedding to the second oldest Sinclair, who is in line to be the next laird if we never find Cavan again, Cavan has escaped the barbarians and made his way home. And just conveniently, he's made his way home this day. And so as she's about to marry the second oldest brother, her stepfather steps in and says, I wrote up the marriage contract specifically that she marry the next heir of the clan. And so that means that this marriage to the second oldest brother was really a marriage by proxy for Cavan. And so Cavan has returned. He's actually turned down marrying her before he ever went away because he thought she was too meek and mild for him. And so I was nervous starting to read this because Cavan is a bit crazed after being held captive and abused and mistreated for a year. And Honora is very timid. She has been trained to be that way, trained to stay out of reach of her stepfather's view, out of his hands. And so Cavan, he wants a wife who will stand beside him like his mother does for his father. And he looks at this meek, terrified child that he's been married to, and he just is disgusted by it. And so that's hard to read, his POV on it. However, once she is married to him, she belongs to him. He cares for her. And so even though he's like angry and pissed off that he's escaped prison and he just wants to get back to life, and he still wants to find his youngest brother because they have not found the youngest brother yet. And so he's determined to not live in peace and be happy until his youngest brother is saved. And so that puts them in an interesting position. But the more times that they have interactions and that they're around each other, he realizes that there is something there. There is something inside her, deep down, that if given the chance to flourish, could be really amazing, right? And so he starts to learn patience, and she starts to learn boldness, and he offers to teach her how to defend herself, and he stands up to, her stepfather for her, and it's so beautiful. Like, I ended up giving this one a 5-star because they just both had so much growth. And it wasn't that they completely changed who they were. I believed the steps that we saw, and that with the love and care that they both give to each other, she stops being so timid and he stops being so angry. And I really loved how they met in the middle. But I will say the first 100 pages of this where he's barking at her and just, he doesn't know what's happened to her, right? He has to kind of figure out what's happened to her based on her reactions and stuff. So I know that if she had told him from the jump that he would not have been that way with her. And so that gave me some grace for him to like wait for him to figure it out. And again, I listened to this one on audio. It had the same narrator as the other one. Really like him. So this one was really great, and I can't wait to read more Donna Fletcher. You'll definitely see this video in an upcoming Scottish romance, and I just really liked it, and I'm glad because I've bought a lot of Donna Fletcher, and so I'm glad that I liked it. All right, I'm gonna talk about this one, and then I'll talk about, ooh, I'm really excited to talk about one of these books. So then I read the last full-length novel in the Duke's Daughter series. There's still a novella, which I was hurrying through this so that I could get to that one because my friend Bethany gave me the novella for this series. But this is Never a Bride by Megan Frampton, and this is about the sister I mentioned earlier who ran away with her dance teacher and then was abandoned. So she has a bastard daughter. And we start this book where she has returned to London with her sister and, I mean, her sister's new husband, because spoiler alert, that one has a happily ever after. And she's brought with her these group of young women who've all kind of been abandoned in one way or another. And her friend, who kind of runs this caretaking thing with her, has lost her husband. But not lost as in he's dead. We actually don't know if he's dead or not. And he was a sailor on Captain Griffith Davies' ship. And so this book starts with Della finding Griffith at a pub and asking him if he knows who this guy is. So Griffith has actually just gotten in trouble because he released a bunch of slaves from a slaving ship that the Majesty's Navy captured. And instead of waiting around for the courts to decide what to do with these men and women, he let them go. And so he's returned to England and is getting a court-martial. However, while he's been away at sea, his older brothers have died, and his cousin, who's like his best friend, is the heir to the, or is the Duke. And his older brothers would have been the heirs after him, but they have died. And so this cousin, who's the Duke, he's very ill. He's pretty feeble, and he may die at any time. And so he needs Griffith to come, you know, and be the Viscount that he's supposed to be, and to take his place in society. And so Griffith doesn't want to do that, but he decides to use his influence to help Della find her friend's husband who's missing. We don't know if he died, if he ran away, if he's been waylaid, if he has amnesia, because there was a shipwreck, which Griffith knows that this man survived because he saw him on his way afterwards. But they end up spending a lot of time together, and they decide to pretend to be engaged, so this is a fake dating, and pretty immediately they realize how attracted they are to each other, and I love when there's like early attraction in the book. But Della, she's been controlled by her father when she lived at home, and then she's been independent for the last years, living on her own, and so she really doesn't want a man to try to control her. And not that Griffith is doing that, but he's a pretty like bombastic and loud personality, and she just doesn't want to be run roughshod over by some guy, which is completely fair, right? Completely fair. So that's kind of how they're going to have to deal with everything. And it was really great. There are some submissive, the Viscount is submissive in a couple sexual scenes where Della decides to take charge. And I was like, Megan Frampton, I see you. She's done that in a couple of her other books too, where she has the ladies in charge. And I'm a big fan of when that happens. And there's one scene in here, let's just say, where no touching's allowed. And it was amazing. Okay, so that was a 4.5 star for me. All right, so the last book I want to talk about is I was asked to read a review copy of this book. It's coming out February 14th, I believe, but I was reached out to by the publicity team for Shirra Lynn. Shirra Lynn is going to be a debut author with this book, and this is a World War II modern historical romance, okay? There's a lot of words in that sentence that scare me, okay? I don't like reading books about World War II, and I don't really like modern historicals. However, when I heard what this book was about, which you can maybe see from the cover of it by my head here, I just had to try. I had to try it and see, because I knew that if it was done well and the research had been done, and this is a POC author, Shirra Lynn is a Black woman, that this could be amazing. And so this book, I, absolutely don't want to spoil it because it isn't even out yet, but I will definitely be talking more about it in 2021 when it comes out. This book is about a woman named Victoire, who is a Black lounge singer in Paris in 1940. And then we have Emil, who is a surgeon and doctor, and his father is a member of the Third Reich and is continually pushing him to be more and more involved. And Emil wants nothing to do with that, but he is increasingly forced more and more into a role that he does not want to inhabit. And so the meet cute of these two, as it were, is actually one-sided. Victoire is performing at a nightclub, and Emil happens to be there with his best friend, and Emil has never really been around any Black people before, just where he lives and obviously his sheltered life, and he sees this woman and he is gobsmacked by her beauty and her voice, and he's with these two other chicks that him and his friend are with, and he's just like, I have no interest in them. And then he doesn't see her again for 6 months, and he's walking home from work one day with his friend, and he sees her being roughed up by some officers. And Emil is just immediately, he goes into this red haze of rage that they would dare touch this woman and mistreat her. And so he barges in and he punches the guys, honestly getting himself in a little bit of trouble. And him and his friend, they take this girl, so there also is an age gap happening, because I believe she's like 22, 23, and he is 38, I think he's 38. And he wants to rescue her, but the only way to not make it weird that he would have jumped in is he says that she's actually his new maid that he hired. And because that's the only thing that these men he's talking to would understand. And Victoire, realizing the danger that she's in, immediately is like, yep, I'm his maid, that's me, it's my first day, haven't started before. And so she takes this hand held out to her by Emil, and she jumps on it for survival, basically. And so that all happens pretty early in this book. And then it is this beautiful slow burn of these two living on his country estate, because he has actually just bought this home out of town because he doesn't want to be constantly surrounded by what's happening in Paris right now. So it's actually like on his estate. And so he was going to hire staff, but now he just hires Victoire to keep her safe there. Really, he changes so much about his life to keep this woman safe. And he doesn't want her to feel like she owes him anything or to feel pressured by anything. She knows nothing about keeping a house. She has been a famous touring singer. She had a career and she had a life, and it's just been stripped away from her. But she never lets that get her down. She never complains or whines. She takes this second chance because we know what was about to happen to her. We have things from her POV, and she's grateful, and not in a way that is, I don't know the word to use, but you can just feel her she's grateful, and now she's going to make the best of the opportunity that she has now to be this guy's housekeeper and maid. And what's really cool, again, this is a really slow burn. I really felt the tension building and just how respectful they were both trying to be of each other. But you can just see, like, they only say a few words to each other each day, where she will make his breakfast and his coffee and set out his lunch for the day, and she'll say, here you go, Von Houtzig, I don't know how to say his last name, and he'll be like, thank you, Victoire. And each day they'll like say it just a little differently because it's the only words they say to each other every day. And otherwise she's just kind of left in certain isolate. Well, she does go into town because now she's known as his maid, so she like can go into town and stuff. I don't know. It was beautiful. And so that's the setup of the story. Again, I don't want to go into more of it until it's closer to being out, but I just want you to put this book on your radar. I want you to check out the author's Instagram, Shirra Lynn, because this is going to be a book I talk about a lot, and I can't at this point tell you why it was worth it to go through the pain that this book will give you, but knowing this was a guaranteed HEA and that I was fascinated by the setup of this book is the only way I was able to go into it, because yeah, black woman, white man, Third Reich in World War II, none of those things make me excited to pick up romance, okay? They did not make me excited. And I was messaging, I sent Crystal an 8-minute long bawl about this book when I finished it, because I'm like, I can't talk to anyone, and I'm sorry, I have to tell you the whole thing. And also to Jessin, I was messaging her on Instagram, and I was like, Jessin, this book, it's so good. So yeah, it worked for me. It was amazing. And people say, like, these are the things you don't talk about. You don't talk about Nazis, and you don't talk about this or whatever. And I'm like, but there's people who lived those experiences, and they were real. And it's foolish to believe that there was never a romance between people who shouldn't have it, you know? And one thing I will say to encourage this is, like, there is a reckoning and an answering for Emil's part in everything, which is a limited part. And we can say, oh, you hated that person all you want. And it would be foolish to believe that every person involved in a bad thing wanted to be there, because it was life and death for both of them, just in different ways. And it is clear, like, who had the more privilege in this situation. But Emil still isn't free to love who he wants if the woman that he loves is this black singer. And I don't know, the way that the author handled it, she had done a ton of research on this. There is notes on it and like the things that she did. And in the end, it's all going to be up to you. And that's going to be in your hands, whether you trust my recommendation for this or not. But it was such a special read, and I cannot wait to talk more about it. And look at this fucking cover. This cover sold me. It is absolutely gorgeous. It's a husky man and a curvy lady in the backdrop of 1940s France. So there you are. Okay, I knew I was going to talk a lot about that book because I really want to sell it to you to try it. These are the 12 books that I read this week. Thank you so much for being here for this. Thank you to my new channel members. It means so much to me that you're here. And yeah, enjoy the week of Bridgerton content coming out. I'm very excited to make it. I've been looking forward to this all year to get to do this. And now that it's here, I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.